Hello and welcome to a well-thought-out episode of the Poor Hammer Podcast, episode 131. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
This week, we're going to be doing a basic introduction, a noob's guide of sorts, to both Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, seeing as Space Marine 2 comes out the week that this episode airs. So, we should probably do an intro guide for all of the new Warhammer curious people in the audience.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we did the original Space Marine and Chaos Space Marine propaganda episodes.
Yeah, and we might as well get them all in one place in a very intro-level beginner's guide of sorts before letting you go through our backlog of many episodes explaining all sorts of things, very poorly usually. But enough of that. Let's get everyone into this explanation.
Sounds good.
Alright, so we're interested in playing Space Marine 2 and we're wondering what Warhammer is as a setting. So to start us off, this episode is just going to be about the Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines. It'll keep us going for a while. There's a lot of lore in Warhammer. You could say there are dozens of channels that do nothing but cover Warhammer lore for hundreds of hours.
Yeah, I think it's been around for at least a couple years, right?
One or two. Some non-believers would say they've been stealing the ideas of others since the late 80s. We all know better. Time travel is real. But for a quick rundown of the Imperium and Space Marines and all of that, let's go through a 2-minute history lesson of the Imperium. There was this dude called the Emperor. He had amazing psychic powers and was a bit of a dick. In the way long ago of Warhammer 29K, he created himself 20 super soldier sons that he called the Primarchs. 2 of them were so unbelievably based that he deleted them from history, and now there are only 18 Primarchs that anyone knows about. He gave each of these Primarchs their own legion of Space Marines of hundreds of thousands of Space Marines to control, and then gave them all the orders to go spread out and take over the galaxy in his name, so that they could take over the entire galaxy for humanity's sake, in air quotes, even though no one involved was a human.
Alright, so what is a Space Marine?
A Space Marine is what happens when you kidnap a 12-year-old human, and you jack him up full of drugs and hypno-indoctrination to brainwash him, and then have him possibly kill several of his 12-year-old friends in war games.
The classic Naruto.
Yes, they all go through the tuning exam. This is exactly how this works. This is canon. And then you jack them full of even more drugs and genetic mutations that you take any humanity out of, turn them into transhuman super soldiers, and put them in power armor.
Alright, so these Space Marine super soldiers went out and tried to fight against the universe, but what were they fighting against?
Xenos mostly, of various levels of alienness. Some of them rather normal aliens, some of them literally just humans who didn't want to be part of the evil empire, and some of them basically like the Tyranids in Space Marine 2 of just ravenous Xenos. But partway through this great crusade, things got a little more complicated when some of the Primarchs realized that Chaos Gods existed and that Dad was possibly also evil, even though it was pretty well spelled out before then, but I guess their super brains were a little slow. So some of them were manipulated by these Chaos Gods to turn traitor against the Emperor and overthrow him for the good of mankind. Definitely not for the good of the Chaos Gods.
No, obviously not.
It's definitely not a bunch of idiots getting manipulated by literally everybody in power. So then an event called the Horus Heresy occurs, where Horus, one of the Primarchs, leads half of them against the Emperor. This ends with Horus getting deleted from existence, his right-hand man Abaddon taking over for him afterward, a bunch of Primarchs dying or getting sent off to the Void to return later when it is most beneficial for monetary reasons to return them to the story, with brand new shiny models that you can buy for $170 or more.
Sounds like a rousing success for the Emperor.
Yeah, except for turning into a corpse of his former self and getting jammed onto a throne while being put on a super life support system to keep him alive for the next 10,000 years.
Right. That could be kind of annoying.
And then in the Emperor's absence afterwards, the Imperium slowly descends into being a theocracy led by incredibly crazy people who worship the Emperor as a god, thanks in no small part to some of those traitors who thought it would be very funny to pull a prank to turn the famous atheist state into a theocracy, worshiping the man who really didn't want to be worshipped as a god.
He wasn't actually serious when he said, "Don't worship me as a god." It was all tongue-in-cheek, and he actually meant the opposite.
Please no, don't turn me into a genie. I don't want to go in the bottle. And then as far as the Space Marines were concerned, half of the legions went off to the warp after turning to chaos, and the other half got shattered into what are called chapters by Guilliman's massive brain in the Codex Astartes, which all the rules must follow the Codex Astartes, that meme from Space Marine 1 that is what most people know.
It's very important. You have to have rules.
And never deviate from the rule book, ever. Except for when Guilliman comes back and realizes his rulebook was stupid.
It was more of a guideline.
He really wishes that more people had thought that. But the chapter system limited every one of the Loyalist legions to only being 10,000 Space Marines strong, outside of exception cases like being on Crusade. But because of this, we have what are called the first founding chapters, which is just the original Loyalist legions downsized to 10,000. And then all of the successor chapters that are the offshoots because now you have too many Space Marines. And also, what if we want more of them, but we don't want to break the rules about only having 10,000 in any of the chapters? We'll just make more chapters.
That is one way to get around it.
And then we can sell overpriced plastic toys to people for the rest of time. I mean, defend our empire.
Oh, right, yeah. Weird Freudian slip or something like that going on there. All right, I think that's enough of the general overview, but let's actually get into the chapters that are in Space Marine 2, the reason people are probably here watching this video.
All right, well, first of all, we're not talking about the Tyranids or anything in this. Look, if you played the game, you're probably already aware of all the Tyranids lore that matters. Their lore has all the depth of a game of Hungry Hungry Hippos.
They're bugs and they're hungry. So
let's get into the actual stars of the show and their evil kin who you could play in the multiplayer mode.
Sounds good.
So before we get into Chaos Space Marines and have some real fun, let's start off with the Loyalist Space Marines. Chapter-wise, it looks like all of the first founding chapters are in and a bunch of successor chapters. First founding being the original 9 legions that kept their names and became chapters, and successor chapters being all the extras that had to get made because there were too many of them.
Oh, this is reminding me of middle school getting picked last kind of nonsense, man.
So let's start off with the poster children, the Ultramarines, the literal poster children in this case, as they are on the actual poster, the boys in blue.
Yeah, I think that's a great start. There's a lot of books and lore about them.
Ultramarines have a slight Roman tinge to them compared to all of the other chapters. They are famous for being rational, even though all Space Marines are supposed to have superhuman brain power, and being expert tacticians. They are basically just an excuse for a generalist main character faction.
Which can be made fun of like, oh, it's just generic and whatever, but it is nice to have a more blank canvas so that you can adapt as needed kind of thing and make it your own a bit more. Yeah, there's nothing really wrong with Ultramarine. They're just kind of the default.
And to the Ultramarines vanilla ice cream, we have the Imperial Fist French vanilla ice cream. The same generalist, boring main character faction, but without the Roman aesthetic and instead having Bob the Builder aesthetic. Imperial Fists like to build things and like to defend structures and hold the line.
And heavy bolters.
Yeah, and heavy bolter.
They fucking put heavy bolters on everything.
So Imperial Fists don't have too much making them stand out other than their bright yellow caution armor. That's how you can know that they're Bob the Builder.
I mean, it is important to have your high visibility when you're on the job site, so.
And then we've got the Iron Hands, who cut off their hands to replace them with Iron Hands to honor their Primarch, who had Iron Hands. They're the mechanics of the Space Marines, and they're about as subtle as a brick when it comes to naming themselves. You see, their symbol is an iron hand.
I mean, when you do one thing well, you don't have to do a second thing, right? That's how that works.
So yeah, if you're a fan of tanks and vehicles and dreadnoughts, then the Iron Hands are your shtick. They're my shtick, that's for sure. Then we've got the Salamanders in a beautiful bright green color. The Salamanders take flame very seriously. They are the Forgemasters. They are the fire and the flame. They like to burn stuff.
Which would be kind of whatever, but I guess in the 40k universe, there's a lot of things that probably need burning.
Going from the light of fire into the deep dark shadows, we have the Ravenguard, who are so sneaky that they have extra meta jokes where everyone forgets that they're a thing, including Games Workshop at times. The Ravenguard basically are your stealthy special special ops guys as far as loyalists are concerned.
They're the tactical.
Yeah, they tend to prefer lighter armor, more flexible, being able to go out in and do special operations while everyone else is on the front lines.
Yeah, pretty classic, cool look. But they also have their Primarch, which is just like a giant demon vulture, right?
Yes, Corvus Corax needs to come back so that we can see his sweet new demon vulture form, but unfortunately, the last time we saw him, he was a normal dude.
Well, one day. And hey, emo culture's making a comeback, so there's always that. For Ravenguard.
Going from the Green Day fans to the White Scars. The White Scars are obsessed with speed. That's why they have lightning bolts on their shoulder pads and are all about going everywhere faster than everybody else. They tend to have a biker motif that won't really get shown off in Space Marine 2 unless there is something I have not seen yet.
I mean, that would be a wild out of left field from everything that we've seen in their previews, but I'm here for it if it happens.
When they add the racing mode, White Scars will be cheating to pick.
Yeah, but they're definitely the speed freak kind of things for Space Marines.
They also have an amazing Primarch with Jagatai Khan, who is a guy who basically realized the entire time that the Emperor sucked and was basically just there at gunpoint to protect his world.
And they did come up with the ultimate tactical advantage, which is the Horse Archer, but, you know, in 40k.
We've updated to Bike Bolter Shooter.
Hey man, if it worked.
Moving on to the Dark Angels, do you like being brooding knights? Do you perhaps like the Renaissance Fair? Do you also like being such a main character that you have to have 3 subsections to your chapter that all specialize in things that other entire chapters specialize in, thus making everybody else redundant to you because you're just so cool? Did you unironically study the blade in high school? If so, Dark Angels is for you.
Yeah, definitely. And they have gotten some new stuff with their Primarch coming back.
That's true. We did a whole episode on The Return of the Lion. Also, it's a good book, so you should go read the book. Moving from one type of angel to another, we go to the Blood Angels. Do you like vampires?
That is kind of the core to Blood Angels, right?
The Blood Angels couldn't settle for being cursed in only one way. They had to get cursed in 2 different ways of having a genetic defect that makes them thirst for the blood of others, and a psychic genetic feedback from when their Primarch died in the Horus Heresy, and now they all get visions of his final moments and being him, and it makes them go crazy on the battlefield and enter a blind rage until they get stopped. So it's neat to have both problems.
Also hilarious that generally they're actually pretty nice to like your average civilian, at least compared to the rest of the chapters we've talked about.
The Salamanders are still nicer, and the White Scars at times. But yeah.
But like, you know, the Blood Angels, the vampires that are cursed to go crazy are actually like pretty high up there on the nice to civilians. So yay, Space Marines, you're the good guys.
They do have the main character syndrome thing that Ultramarines and Imperial Fists have, but they at least have some flavor to them. They're more like a cookies and cream ice cream than just straight vanilla.
All right, fair enough. So do we want to move on to Space Wolves then?
Sure, we can talk about war criminals.
Yeah, had to come up at some point.
Do you work in IT? There's a 1 in 3 chance that you already play Space Wolves. 40k's furries are werewolf space Vikings who have obsession with dogs in every way, naming basically everything after some wolf, fang, claw. They really go hard on it. They're also horrendous war criminals. More so than the rest of Space Marines.
I was gonna say, it's not like they're the only ones on this list, but ignoring that aspect, yeah, they definitely have a Norse wolf theme, and it's very obvious.
But that covers the last of the 9 first founding chapters. Now we can get into a bunch of the more famous successor chapters. Plus, real quick, Deathwatch exists. They're not really a chapter. They're like a weird off-branch program thing that all of the chapters send Space Marines to train them to fight Xenos even harder. They exist.
They're off doing Inquisition things generally with the cool Grey Knights. I'm not biased at all.
Yeah, the Grey Knights also exist. They're not really Space Marines in the Space Marine Adeptus Astartes way. They are Space Marines structurally and are made the same way, but out of pure Psykers, and all of them have psychic abilities and a much more in-depth process to make them filled with like silver plates under their skin to resist demons and all that other stuff. Look, they're not important right now. Maybe in the future, in multiplayer, they'll add some class for Psykers for a Grey Knight on the Loyalist side and 1,000 Suns on the traitor side.
That would be pretty neat, but I think that's enough of the Deathwatch and Grey Knight tangent. I'm moving on to the actual like successor chapters.
So the most famous of them is the Black Templars. They're always on crusade. That's their shtick. They are always crusading. They are the crusaderiest crusaders. That's all they've got.
Yeah, technically they're following all the chapter rules, but because they're on a crusade, they get to cheat so that they get to have more than 10,000 people. But it's definitely like a monk or a knight crusading theme going on, and they do it pretty well.
They are the first proof on this list that Dorn had anger issues, and the Imperial Fists are the exception to the chapters that are made out of Dorn's gene seed. Another successor chapter you've probably heard of before is the Blood Ravens. They were the main characters of the Dawn of War series of video games. They're a pretty normal chapter other than the fact that they have the whole running gag that they steal everything.
I mean, it's kind of in their name, right? They see a shiny thing and they take it. That's what ravens do.
Another successor chapter is the Carcharodons, formerly called the Space Sharks. They were forced to change their names because it was just too damn cool, so they went from Space Shark to the Latin word for shark.
I feel like there's probably more to those, but these are ones I have no real attachment to and haven't really heard too much of, so Space Shark sounds good.
The successor chapters are basically a choose-your-own-adventure for finding a book series that made one of them up. They basically exist as your examples to work off of when designing your own chapter to play the game with.
Makes sense.
Then there are the Exorcists, who are the Space Marine version of Grey Knights. They work with the Inquisition quite a bit and do things that the Grey Knights do, but they're Space Marines. They don't get talked about much anymore, but they exist. At one point, they were rumored to be a Grey Knight successor chapter before they retconned the lore more to ensure that the Grey Knights were not a chapter.
Except sometimes when whoever's writing it forgets and is like, yeah, obviously they're a chapter, right? Like...
And then to wrap this list up, with one more example of why Dorn was a bloodthirsty monster, we have the Minotaurs. A famously violent chapter that would be right at home in the Chaos Space Marines. Once again, a successor chapter of the defensive-oriented Imperial Fists, who totally aren't secretly raging monsters. Just so happens that all of the successor chapters of them are famous assholes.
So they got good at building things to keep them away from others.
The wall is there to protect you from me.
Yeah, right? It's not what the actual underlying is going there, but fair enough, Minotaurs.
And who could forget the Scythes of the Emperor, the chapter that I got to spend half a book with and was glad that they had gone extinct.
All right, that's enough of the Space Marines. Let's move into their, as you said, better or more fun counterpart, the Chaos Space Marines.
Yes, so not all of the Chaos Space Marine Legions are going to be in the launch of Space Marine 2, but we'll cover them all just in case they get added down the road. It's not like there's many of them to go through. It's not like with Space Marines where there's 45 Sonic OC fanfic chapters coming out every quarter.
So where do we want to start?
Let's start with the Black Legion.
Ah, classic.
The ragtag group of various legions piled together into the Black Legion under Abaddon to crusade against the Imperium of Man. They're the vanilla ice cream of the bad guys. They're the spiky Ultramarines.
I mean, they did have the whole, like, crusade thing where, like, they just keep going on crusades to try and eventually destroy a singular planet.
Ah, yes, the 13 Black Crusades.
Successful eventually.
Why are there 13? Because 13 is a cool evil number. Does that make your main antagonist look incompetent? Yes, but they didn't think about it because 13 was a cool number.
We'll fix it in post. It'll be fine.
We'll fix it with retcons later. No, those first 12, they had secret objectives. What were they? Fuck you, don't ask.
It hasn't come up yet. It'll be important in the future, though. Definitely.
They were doing shenanigans off to the side. They mattered. And while we had the Bizarro Ultramarines, now we have the Bizarro Imperial Fists with the Iron Warriors. The Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fists hate each other. The Imperial Fists build stuff. The Iron Warriors are the siegecraft experts who tear everything down. Ta-da! Their Primarchs hated each other. They were bickering brothers. One of them was liked more by Dad. The Iron Warriors are pretty cool, though, to be honest. They have the mechanical theme as far as the Chaos Space Marines go. In the more modern era, they deal more with Deamon engines than, like, normal tanks, but same deal. They're your warp mechanized army.
Yeah, you just take a Deamon and you shove it in a tank.
And now it's got legs.
And now it's got legs, yes. That's how this works.
And a cute little snoot. Look at the Mauler Fiend, it's so cute.
With all the spikes. Very cuddly.
Princess doesn't bite. Princess Mauler Fiend. But if mechanized armies aren't your thing, then there's the Alpha Legion if you want to have the true spies of the 40k setting. The sneakiest guys, they're so deep undercover, they don't know if they're loyalists or if they're traitors. They're like 15 layers deep of being like a quadruple octuple agent.
I mean, that makes sense. It's one of those, like, to fool your enemy, you have to fool your friend first. Why not just fool yourself?
The Sons of Alfarius, famous for the phrase, I am Alfarius.
Oh, I thought it was all according to Keikaku.
No, that's Abaddon's phrase after 13 Black Crusades. But the Alpha Legion is famous for the phrase, I am Alfarius, which is a way to borrow their Primarch's name and give themselves an anonymity and a unified identity, and also to be massive meme lords by shouting it at random times. Look, writing is hard.
I mean, if you keep making the same joke over and over again, eventually it becomes funny.
Our podcast has over 100 episodes proving this.
Eventually it'll be funny.
If you want to know that you're evil, you could look into word bearers. Word bearers also aren't actually in Space Marine 2 to my knowledge for the launch. They are the demon experts. They're the whole hog chaos worshippers. They didn't like partially fall to chaos or like have a disagreement with the emperor. No, they were like, yo, I can summon demons?
I'm in. Fully sold. Let's go.
You guys want to stay loyal?
Have you seen these ritual offerings and demons? Come on.
So yeah, the word bearers are your basic satanic priest type deal of summoning demons and making pacts with devils and doing all of the fun things that a religious mom from the 80s would have hated. That's the word bearers summarized.
Classic.
And then the Nightlords answers the question of, what if Batman was a psychopath who flayed people alive instead of just being a vigilante? What if the Joker played Batman? I'm sure that's a comic. But yes, the Nightlords are your batshit crazy, all pun intended, because they've got a whole bat motif, who just absolutely love tearing people to shreds in front of other people to scare them. The Ravenguard like to do things a sneaky way and like take out important people from the shadows or whatever. Same with Alpha Legion. The Nightlord said, what if we were sneaky getting there, but then we made a real big show of killing your boss in front of you and then asked if you wanted to work for us.
It's about the message and how it comes across. And the Nightlords have their way.
And then there is the 4 legions that each fell to a specific chaos god. The Emperor's Children fell to Slaanesh, the god of excess, drug, sex, and rock and roll. They sadly aren't in Space Marine 2, but if they ever get added, you will get to see a sonic blaster, aka killing people with a guitar.
Noise Marines are pretty epic.
For something that is in Space Marine 2, there is the Deathguard. They worship Nurgle, the god of disease and plagues and life and death. While everybody else sees life and death as a binary thing, Nurgle sees it as a sliding scale that you can move things around in. This gives them a bunch of longevity and feeling extra tanky compared to everybody else. That's why they play the bulwark role in Space Marine 2.
Very nasty tanks.
Then we have the World Eaters, who worship Khrone, the god of blood and skulls. If you know nothing else about 40k, you have probably heard jokes about blood for the blood god and skulls for the skull throne. That's the World Eaters, that's Khrone. It's the least subtle version of chaos. It's every 80s metal album.
It's just unadulterated rage of fighting and killing.
And the World Eaters exemplify this by literally smashing nails into their brains. That's not a joke, that's what they do.
It's pretty metal.
And finally, we have the protagonists of the setting, the main characters as it were, the best Legion, the Thousand Sons. There's no bias here.
No bias whatsoever.
The Thousand Sons are the worshippers of Tzeentch, the god of destiny, sorcery, mutation, and change. The Thousand Sons are awesome. Magnus is a great character who did nothing wrong. It's just a shame that in multiplayer you're not allowed to play as them because it would be too cool.
Wow.
No one would want to play anything else. Everyone else is shooting guns. You get to be a space wizard.
No, Space Wizard is pretty cool.
Alright, so that wraps up the last of the legions. Again, if you want a more in-depth look, give our other videos on the subject a shot. We have full episodes of an hour-long propaganda episode for both Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, and then feel free to peruse any of our other topics. We do a lot of intro-level episodes for new players. We've got a whole playlist dedicated for it on YouTube. It's a fun game. I highly recommend that you take the dive and learn more. And if you liked this episode, please feel free to do the YouTube pleasantries for us. It would be a big help. Also, I guess we've got merch. We've got a Patreon. You could support us there. But Eric's voice barely held out through this episode, so I think it's time for us to get out of here.
Sounds good.